From coffins shaped like chili peppers to a crematorium owner who hid 300 dead bodies, here are some of the craziest facts about funerals. The oldest coffin ever discovered was found in a tomb in Baishaoling, Shanxi, China. It was a simple rectangular box made of wood that was made sometime around 5000 BC. Archaeologists believe it once held the remains of a 4-year-old girl. Coffins come in all shapes and sizes and can be found in cultures all over the world. Most people today opt for a no-frills wooden box because, after all, who's going to see it once you're 6 feet under? Some, however, want something a little more personal. In Ghana, West Africa, there's a whole cottage industry of woodworkers who design whimsical-themed coffins shaped like anything from rocket ships to sneakers. These custom caskets are called abebu adekai in the Ga language, which roughly translates to fantasy coffins in English. Ghana is also famous for its tradition of dancing pallbearers, a clip of which went viral in 2020. Similar West African traditions of dancing at funerals are what eventually evolved into the New Orleans tradition of jazz funerals, where a marching band playing jazz music accompanies the coffin on a procession through town. Back on the subject of coffins, did you know there's a club where you can learn to make your own? In Ulverstone, Tasmania, Australia, a group called the Community Coffin Club meets once a week to learn how to build coffins. The club, started by Lynn Jarvis in 2016, is intended to help people cut down on the cost of funerals, which can be extremely expensive, as well as to educate the community on eco-friendly burial practices. The Coffin Club was a success, and similar clubs have popped up in other parts of Australia. What about the bodies that go inside a coffin? Well, it turns out that a lot of work goes to making a body look presentable for an open casket funeral. The practice of embalming goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, but in the West, the practice as we know it didn't come into fashion for the average person until the American Civil War. In American culture, most people before the Civil War were buried at home, with the cleaning of the body being taken care of by the deceased's family. However, during the Civil War, more and more men were dying farther and farther from home, and in an age before air travel. It could take days to transport a corpse from the battlefield to its final resting place. In response to this, Dr. Thomas Holmes pioneered the use of arsenic in order to preserve dead bodies, to ensure they weren't too decomposed by the time they reached their families. One of the first big names to get embalmed in the US was none other than Abraham Lincoln, whose body took 19 days to get from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois, where he was set to be buried. Nowadays, thankfully, arsenic isn't used for embalming anymore. Formaldehyde is the chemical of choice for most embalmers. When human bodies, surgical tools, and so many caustic chemicals are involved, it makes sense that you gotta spend a lot of time training to become a mortician. People looking to get into the funeral business attend mortuary school and study toward a final exam. In America, the exam is called the National Board Exam, which is administered by the International Conference of Funeral Service Examining Boards. On top of that, since so many states have unique and varying laws on what can and can't be done with a dead body, you have to take a second exam to get a license to perform funerals in the state where you intend to do business. One school that you might go to if you want to be a mortician is called the McAllister Institute, which is often called the Harvard of mortuary schools. This reputation was well earned. The rate of students passing exams at the McAllister Institute was 20% above the national average for mortuary school exams. In 2013, though, the secret for those high success rates was finally revealed. An anonymous student informed the exam boards that they'd been given very specific and direct answers to the exam questions by the college president, Mary Margaret Dunn. Apparently, this wasn't the only time she'd done this. After the initial anonymous tip, the board heard from more students who said that Dunn had pressured them into sharing their exam answers. Turns out there was a school-wide cheating conspiracy, and as a result, 300 graduates of the McAllister Institute had their exam results disqualified. Everyone dies, and because people come in all shapes and sizes, that means that funerals have to come in all shapes and sizes. Unfortunately, for very fat or very tall people, sometimes funerals can get a little complicated. Unless you're a member of the Coffin Club yourself, getting an extra large casket can be pretty pricey. Though more and more funeral homes have started keeping oversized caskets in stock, they often still have to be custom made. The longest custom coffin ever built was made for Robert Wadlow, who stood at a staggering 8 feet 11 inches and tragically passed away at 22 years old. Wadlow's coffin was 10 feet long and had to be carried by 12 pallbearers and 8 assistants. Burying a larger-than-average person also requires a larger-than-average cemetery plot, which isn't always available as most cemeteries unfortunately plan their layouts with only average-sized bodies in mind. In some cases, such as the case of John Brower Minock, a taxi driver in Washington, USA, who weighed over 1,000 pounds, the deceased family might even have to pay for 2 burial plots. Cremation also works differently for larger bodies. As you can probably imagine, a larger person needs more heat to be completely cremated. But it can't be heated too quickly because on a corpse with a higher body fat, the fat can burn too fast and create a lot of thick black smoke, which can gunk up the cremation oven. For this reason, crematoriums usually cremate the larger bodies first thing in the morning, when the bricks are at their coolest. Even though evidence of coffins and embalming have been found at archaeological sites all over the world, not every culture buries their dead. Cremation is today the most common form of funeral outside of burial. And though it's more and more common today, it's been surprisingly controversial throughout history. The 3 Abrahamic religions, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, generally all consider cremation to be highly disrespectful to the deceased, with some Christian texts stating that if the body has been destroyed, it can't be resurrected on Judgment Day. The Baha'i faith and Zoroastrianism, too, traditionally frown on cremation. Meanwhile, in Buddhism, Hinduism, and many European pagan traditions, putting the deceased in an open-air funeral pyre is the preferred method for setting the deceased soul free. Cremation as we know it in the West today, performed in an indoor crematorium, didn't start to gain popularity until the 19th century when it began to be used as a solution to overcrowded graveyards. The cremation rate in the UK was about 79.8% in 2022, a rate which has been increasing since the 30s. Most of the UK's cremated dead come from England, Wales, and Scotland. The practice is still relatively uncommon in Northern Ireland. In the United States, cremation is much less popular, with the cremation rate only being around 59%. It varies greatly from region to region. The cremation rate on the West Coast is 70%, while in the South it's just under 30%. Most Americans who choose to be cremated do so as a cost-saving measure. On the other side of the globe, Japan currently cremates 99% of its dead, putting it at a tie with Nepal for the highest cremation rate in the world. On the other hand, Greece has the lowest cremation rate in the world at just 2% of deaths being cremated. One major scandal involving cremation happened in Georgia in the USA back in 2002, when the Atlanta office of the Environmental Protection Agency received an anonymous tip to go check out the tri-state crematorium. They conducted an investigation that led to the discovery of 339 human corpses. These corpses were everywhere, in a storage shed, in vaults, inside and outside of the crematorium. A federal investigation was launched to try to identify the remains, but this proved nearly impossible, as so many were in advanced stages of decomposition. Though this sounds like something out of a horror movie, the truth of what happened was more like something out of a sitcom. The Tri-State Crematorium had been operating since the 1970s when it was founded by a local businessman, Tommy Marsh. After being diagnosed with dementia, Tommy passed the business on to his son, Ray Brent Marsh, in 1996. This was all well and good in theory, but Ray Brent Marsh didn't actually know how to perform cremation, so he just didn't. He dumped the bodies wherever he could and gave the families urns full of concrete dust and ashes from burnt wood. During Ray Brent Marsh's trial, the prosecution brought up the fact that it would have been far less trouble for him to just figure out how to use and maintain the cremation oven than have to find hiding places for all the corpses. In response, Marsh was quoted as saying, "To those of you who may have come here today looking for answers, I cannot give you any." It turns out the funeral industry is just as cutthroat as every other business. Funerals are a $20 billion industry in the US, which is almost as much money as the global music industry makes in a year. The largest funeral services business in America is Service Corporation International, who owns 1,500 funeral homes and 500 cemeteries across the country. Meanwhile, in Australia, the InvoCare conglomerate owns 37% of the country's funeral homes. And since companies like Service Corporation International and InvoCare are run for profit, that leads to fun things like InvoCare's annual report bemoaning a reduction in case volume, when the yearly mortality rate wasn't as high as they expected back in 2017. Have you ever wondered what happens to cosmetic and medical implants when someone gets cremated? Well, assistive devices like pacemakers need to be removed before cremation because the heat can cause them to explode. For this reason, crematories require the family of the deceased to disclose whether or not the deceased had a pacemaker. Sometimes, though, when the wrong information is given, it can spell disaster. In 1998, an 82-year-old widow from Gien, France had to pay the equivalent of just over $16,000 in damages after she failed to inform the crematory workers that her departed husband had a pacemaker. This simple paperwork mistake caused an explosion that had the same force of 2 grams of TNT and sent debris flying out at 60 miles an hour. Things like metal hip and knee replacements will be left in the body and will come out on the other end charred but still intact. The metal is then removed from the leftover bones after cremation, either by hand or by using a big magnet. Afterwards, they might be returned to the deceased family, or more often than not, the medical components are broken down and recycled. As for silicone breast implants, they're usually left in the body during cremation, but they do tend to melt and stick to the bottom of the machine. This is annoying for the people who have to clean the machine, but scraping the goo off isn't that big of a deal. In the case of aquamation or water cremation, implants, even plastic ones, are nearly left in pristine condition, and doctors hope that in the future implants can be recycled and reimplanted as a much lower cost option than making a whole new implant from scratch. What's that? You've never heard of water cremation? Allow us to explain. It might sound like a total oxymoron, but water cremation is also known as aquamation or resumation, and might just be the next big thing in the funeral industry. Unlike traditional burials, it doesn't take up space, and unlike cremation, it doesn't pollute the atmosphere. Aquamation uses a process known as alkaline hydrolysis, which is a chemical reaction that causes organic matter to dissolve in water. In an aquamation, the body is placed in a mixture of water and potassium hydroxide, which is then heated to 320 degrees Fahrenheit or 160 degrees Celsius, while the mixture is pressurized to prevent it from boiling. After about 6 hours, the body will be completely broken down to its base elements: amino acids, peptides, sugars, and salts, with the only solid remaining being softened leftover calcium from the bones. Depending on the wishes of the deceased's next of kin, the remains can be disposed of in a number of ways. The calcium dust can be filtered out and kept like normal cremated ashes, while the liquid remains can be disposed of through the sewer system or repurposed as fertilizer. Aquamation is still fairly unheard of in most places. In 2007, only about 1,000 Americans chose to be aquamated, but it's becoming more popular as a more sanitary and environmentally friendly alternative to cremation. Even though it seems futuristic, the patent for the first aquamation machine was created all the way back in 1888. The patent was filed by Amos Herbert Hobson, who wanted to create a more efficient way to process the remains of livestock into plant food. The first human-sized aquamation systems were built at the Mayo Clinic in 2005, but alkaline hydrolysis is still used for its original purpose as a way to dispose of dead livestock today, as the process sterilizes the remains as they break down, preventing the spread of disease. Like every non-traditional funeral method, the introduction of human aquamation was not without controversy. In Indiana, in the USA, a bill to make aquamation legal was tanked by an impassioned speech by Representative Dick Ham in 2015. In his speech, he urged his fellow lawmakers to vote no on the bill, saying that it would be barbaric to just flush human remains down the drain into the sewer. This evocative claim changed quite a few minds on the issue, and as a result, aquamation remains illegal in Indiana to this day. What was it that made Representative Ham so passionate about the issue in the first place? Well, unfortunately, it wasn't just a case of being misinformed about the process. It turns out, when he's not a representative in the state of Indiana, Dick Ham owns a casket selling business, 2 of them in fact. He even formerly served as the president of the Casket and Funeral Supply Association of America. Another much more ancient alternative to traditional burial is the Zoroastrian Tower of Silence, also sometimes called a sky burial. Zoroastrians, as we said earlier, typically frown on cremation, but they're not very keen on burying their dead either. In their culture, both methods are seen as polluting nature, so instead, they leave their bodies in the open air in a place called a Tower of Silence, where the corpses are then eaten by carrion birds. The practice is thousands of years old, but in the modern day it's run into some problems. The Parsi people of India who practice Zoroastrianism have struggled with their deceased loved ones taking longer to be disposed of due to declining vulture populations. As you can see, everyone has different views on death and how to say goodbye to their loved ones. Some ways are tragic and involve burials. Some traditions turn death into a dance party. However you honor the dead, at least be thankful you most likely won't be fed to vultures, since they are going extinct and all. Now check out funeral home secrets they don't want you to know, or watch Insane Times People Woke Up at Their Own Funeral.